Everybody, Eric Dorward here at the Spartan Rocketry Club, and it is time to start finishing up my build here of the Estes BOSS. Specifically, it's time to put some decals on this thing. So I have painstakingly trimmed out all the decals from the big old decal sheet. There are quite a few of them, actually a few that I haven't quite trimmed out, but just for reference, I go through it pretty quickly and just trim down with my scissors, and then the instructions always recommend that you use a knife for this. I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. I'm much better with scissors than I am with a knife. And there are definitely some where you pretty much have to use a knife, but they are few and far between, to be honest with you. So, this is basically the work that you need to do. Just carefully snip, try to get them close to the edges, and then, whatever scrap you have, well, that goes right in the trash. Anyway, so that's the basic gist of it. It goes pretty quickly. Yeah, there are a couple more here, I guess, to do. But once they're all trimmed off, then it's time to apply them, and that means you need to know where they go. So for a kit like this, there are a lot of little ones, which I generally don't mind. The little ones aren't significantly harder to place. I'm actually going to save, this is probably going to take multiple videos, this big guy that goes on the bottom. I've got this upside down partially for a reason, but I'm going to do that last. I'm going to try to work on this face of it then. I've got a custard cup here, and it's full of pretty hot water, and I'm using that to get the stickers, the decals, loosened up so that I can place them. So in the intervening time, I painted this. It was okay, I guess. I ended up, this is very annoying, but the paper that I had wrapped around this actually unstuck. The tape unstuck and it came off, which was a big irritant because then some paint seeped in behind there, and well, it had some drips and I had to clean them off. I ended up scraping them, just scraping the paint off with my hobby knife, which isn't a great solution. I probably would have been just as well to paint over it, but it was black, so that would have been potentially a problem. Alright, so the nice thing about this decal right here is that it's going to cover most of this fin. And remember, the fin, it was pretty good when it came to filling in the wood grain, but it wasn't great. This is actually a little more stuck than I would like, so I'm going to put it back into the water. The goal is for it to be able to slide a little bit more freely than that. I like it to have some cling to it, but that really wasn't enough. So in any event, I had to repaint just here. The spots are, you can tell if you look closely, but they're not that bad. So overall, reasonably good. Alright, hopefully this is a little looser now. It's still pretty tight, but that's okay. Alright, so this is just going to go on like so. I'm going to try to get it down as far as I can, and then the left edge is going to be, well, that's what I'm going to check my alignment against. Of course, do be careful with these. They are very thin, so not that hard to damage. So just be careful, and even if you don't tear them, it is certainly possible that you could deform them by pulling on them. So keep your hands wet when you're working with them. If your hands are wet, there's a good chance that things will slide properly. Alright, so that's clear. I have a nice new paper towel. Usually mine I've used them for glue, but this one is nice and fresh, so nothing but paper. And I'm going to use it to, partially to dry, but also to just kind of push out any air bubbles that might exist in this. And there are a couple. They come along pretty well. Okay, that's great. Let's pop the next one in, and we'll do the other side. Let's turn this around so that way it's facing me most of the time. I'm going to try to get this face of the rocket done, well, as much as I can in this particular video, and then we'll go from there. This is a time-consuming process, and you are somewhat limited because the hotter the water here, the easier the decals come off. So to figure out where stuff goes, well, there are a couple places that you can use as reference. So here are the instructions. They have all four faces, so that's pretty good. You know, it's helpful. But it's in black and white, so yeah, you know, some of them are harder to see. You can always refer back to the box art. The box art's in color, so that at least, it's a little bit, I have both. I'm going to try to use the instructions as best as I can because the box art, well, it only has limited, it's got one nice big picture. And, oh yeah, it's still very stuck. And then you're kind of on your own. But it's at least a good place to start. And the colors, I find the colors to be helpful. So usually I also try to keep the decals kind of sorted out. Usually there's multiple copies of the same thing. So I try to keep them together. And then beyond that, you know, it's just a matter of trying to keep organized. Alright, hopefully that's looser. This one is surprisingly sticky, I have to say. Not entirely sure why that is, but whatever. And do be careful about the decals curling up under themselves. They love to do that. And if that happens, well, it's generally not great because it's pretty hard to get them, or it can be anyway, it can be pretty difficult to uncurl them once they've decided to cling to themselves. I usually keep my hobby knife at the ready, and not for cutting it, but the hobby knife is like the thinnest thing I have around. Okay, pulling that out. So I can usually get the hobby knife underneath, and then if the hobby knife is underneath it, then I can adjust it and usually separate them. But in general, that's something you want to avoid. Also, this is harder than usual because these pylons are in the way, which they have been before. Now I'm also touching the other side, so I'll make sure I didn't, oh, look at that. That's decal folded over on itself. Speak of the devil. I don't think I did that just now, but I guess it's time to break out the hobby knife and try to separate it. Just be careful, of course, because the hobby knife will definitely cut these things. And you don't want that, if you can help it. Yeah, so, there we go. Oop, folded right back on itself. It was just this little corner. That was the problem. Man. Sometimes if you get them wet, they tend to uncurl as well. So let's give that a try. I'm just going to dip my finger in here and try to like brush. Yeah, that seemed to have worked, at least for the moment. You do need to be very careful because, there we go. Alright, so that's better. If your finger dries out, it has a penchant to stick rather than slide. So, yeah, that's something to be concerned about. Alright, continuing on. What else can I do on this particular side? Well, the pylons, they get these labels on them. SCC 7107, huh? Definitely not a Star Trek reference there. Nobody's going to get sued over that one. I should also point out, so I did get a little bit of black paint that snuck through my shield here on the launch lug. That is unfortunate, but I am not going to repaint that. It's a launch lug. It's not that important. Alright, so hopefully this one will denature or come apart a little bit faster than the others. I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm only going to put a few on this particular video, and then there are a couple other little things that I could do while I let the paint dry here with regard to coloring things. So I'll try to get some of these big ones on because unfortunately my water has cooled off already. And again, the colder the water is, the harder it is to get the backing to come off. Alright, so this is supposed to just run the length of the pylon here, or the engine pod, or whatever you want to call this, the nacelle. So I'm going to carefully, I don't want that to curl, carefully put my thumb down, and then slowly pull the blue part out. Okay. I do want this to be basically centered like horizontally. It looks pretty decent. These things, of course, are not even remotely rigid, so you could definitely end up getting them twisted as they go, so do be careful about that. Okay. Alright, we'll throw the other one in, and yeah, I think my water is surprisingly tepid already. I don't think this has really been that long a video, but evidently it is, because my water has gotten pretty cold. So I'm going to attach this one, so we'll flip this guy over, and then we'll look at some of the other decoration stuff that needs to be done. In fact, we can do that now while the water is, while the decal is soaking. So the instructions actually call for you to break out a marker. So the little portals here, there's 6 of them, it says color them in with a black marker. And the front end of these engine pods, it also says that I need to color them too. So the middle ring is going to be colored black, and then the center little pokey part here on the outside edge, they're supposed to be colored yellow. So I grabbed a couple of Sharpies. I have just a collection of different colored Sharpie markers, and you know, I'm not convinced that this is the same yellow as all the other yellows in my set are in the decals here, but it's going to have to do. So we'll go with that, and I'm just going to color with them. I actually use the black Sharpie from time to time. I actually used it on this build, trying to fill in, because sometimes you get just like little irregularities in the paint, and sometimes you miss a spot here or there. You'd be surprised. Sharpies actually are decent for doing little touch-up fill jobs. They're pretty easy to use, and they generally aren't noticeable. I mean, it does have a little bit of a sheen to it that the black paint that I'm using doesn't. I use gloss paint more often than not, and it's not like the Sharpie is a kind of gloss that the paint isn't. It's just, I don't know, it's just the material, you know, the chemicals of the pen, I guess, that look a little bit different. Alright, so this water is kind of non-usable at this point, so I'm just going to do a little bit of coloring right now, so we'll see how that goes. So I am painting on top of gloss white paint, so sometimes this doesn't work all that well, but we'll just see. It looks pretty good. So I'm just going to be very careful with this, because it being a permanent marker, I really don't want to miss color. And there are a couple of spots that I don't know, the felt in the pen might be a little old or something, but I'll end up going over it a second time where there are inconsistencies. I think it's also just the fact that I'm drawing on top of a glossy paint coat. I'm a little, I don't know how the yellow is going to do. The black at least colors nicely, you know, it goes over top of the white without any issue. So that's fine. It's definitely going to need a second coat, but I'm going to wait until the marker dries entirely. Might as well do the back here as well. This actually feels quite different. This feels like I got, I don't know, more paint on this particular spot. I mean, it doesn't look it, but it just feels different. So that's definitely going to need a touch up. Same deal here. So yeah, this side might have gotten a little bit more paint. It might have, I don't know, I have no idea why it's like this. But anyway, so that obviously needs more paint, but you know, or more pen, but me just coloring over it again isn't going to make it any better. So Not right now, anyway. Later, it should help. All right, so that looks decent. I'm gonna just let this dry for a little bit, and then I will come back a little bit later to do more decals. I suppose, you know, some of this doesn't really require, you know, you don't see me do every single decal on this, but we'll make a decision. And anyway, so the next video is definitely going to be me doing a little bit more decal work, but how much I film, I don't know. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.